The Associate Director of Co-op and Partnerships at the Lassonde School of Engineering at York University. I am your CEWIL host for today's webinar. It's my pleasure to introduce to you the Electricity Human Resources Canada, EHRC, and their Empowering Futures program. And Mark Czapewski, who will be leading the webinar today. Electricity Human Resource Canada is helping industry, educators, unions, and policymakers keep the lights on in Canada by preparing and empowering a world-class workforce for the entire electricity industry. EHRC is the most trusted source of HR insight, programs, and tools to help the sector. Programs like the Empowering Futures Student Work Placement Program are a perfect example of the work EHRC does to attract workers to the sector. A sector facing a retirement of 20% of the workforce by 2022. Mark is the Director of Programs at EHRC and brings almost 10 years of labor markets, intervention and intelligence development and implementation experience to the electricity sector. Mark has also worked in high-tech, international development assistance, and received an undergraduate degree in government from St. Lawrence University in upstate New York, and an MA in human security and peace building from Royal Roads University in beautiful Victoria, British Columbia. Mark leads the Empowering Futures program at EHRC. A couple housekeeping things. Please ask your questions on the fly by using the Q&A function on the bottom taskbar. We will try to respond to them in order, and if we do not get to all the questions in the 1 hour time slot, we will follow up with answers to the questions that we weren't able to get to. Haley is also here from CEWIL as technical support, and so if anyone has any technical issues, please use the chat function on the lower taskbar to connect with Haley, and she'll work with you on your audio or video issues. Participants will not have audio on this, and so you will be just listening and then texting your questions to the Q&A. Also of note, CEWIL will record this session so that members will have access to it later on if there's information that you weren't able to record. So having said all that, it's my pleasure to introduce Mark. Mark, please take it away.
Okay. Bob, thank you so much, and thank you, CEWIL, for the opportunity to connect with you all today across the country. I'm speaking to you from Ottawa, and it is an absolutely beautiful October day here. So why don't we start off with a little bit about us. So EHRC, we are the thought leaders, change agents in strategic labor planning for Canada's electricity sector, as Bob mentioned. We develop comprehensive labor market intelligence with concrete recommendations for action. We translate this LMI to actionable programs, such as the Empowering Futures program. We know the sector needs better youth representation, and we know youth need more job-ready professional skills. So we've developed this program to respond to both of those needs. Our members and board of directors are composed of some of Canada's largest utilities, unions, educational institutions, and we have observers from the federal departments such as NRCan, or Natural Resources Canada. So the goal today is mostly to talk about the Empowering Futures program, but I will mention some of the other things we're working on in tandem. So overall objectives for our version, we know that there are a number of SWIP partners obviously implementing the program, but for our version of the program, placing current students in net new wage subsidized placements nationwide. We now have placements in almost every province and territory across Canada. It's a bit of a virtue of having electricity literally everywhere across the country. So that's one of the benefits of our organization there. We're also developing a professional skills training program for students that could either be taken while they're still studying in school, or plug and play can be used by employers who wish to train students on the job as part of their onboarding. And I'll talk a little bit about that as well. The last piece of it that I'll spend a little bit of time talking about today too is the development of a career portal that we're currently working on to match students to company openings, whether they be co-op or other work integrated learning opportunities. Some of the numbers from the impact we've had just this fiscal year. We've already got 235 students in the program. Total number of students we've enrolled since we started back in February 2018 is 425 actually. So we're well over our numbers for last year, only 6 months into this fiscal year. Last year we had 45 we had a total of 45 employers in the program. This year you can already see that number is well in excess of that. And the same is true of educational institutions. Last year we had 43 post-secondary institutions across the country, and now we're again well over that number. And our hope in working with all of you is to continue to create those engagements, create those opportunities for students across the country. We're a little lower on our numbers for underrepresented groups than we would like to be, only slightly. We had, in working with the SDC, we'd come up with like a 40-60% rule. We're at about 38%, 39%. So we'd like to see more students from the different underrepresented groups represented in our program. So, women in STEM, first-year students, Indigenous students, newcomers to Canada, and students with disabilities. In working with some of the other SWIP partners, we have identified some of the challenges in working with some of these groups. So Indigenous students, for example, students with disabilities and newcomers to Canada. And we continue to work with our the federal funder on some of these challenges. And I'll talk a little bit about how we're overcoming some of that in the latest iteration of the program as well. So company eligibility. So what I like to do also is talk about how a company would apply to the electricity sector program. So the first thing is, are they or are they not eligible to work with us? So if they're in the generation, transmission, distribution, or supporting services to the sector, we are more than happy to work with them. Basically, the fundamental thing that we're looking for is the work must be electricity sector related. Now, supporting services is a pretty broad category. We've had companies that are actually software firms, for example, but their primary client is Tesla Motors, as an example. We've had other firms that their primary function is actually the manufacture of electronic components or devices, that sort of thing. That would still qualify in our iteration of the program. Engineering consulting services, those are also they regularly apply to our program as well. And of course, there's a broad array of renewable energy firms that also would qualify for the program. So I won't spend too much more time on this, but I'm happy to further elaborate as questions come in. Student eligibility. So in order to be eligible, a student needs to be either business or STEAM. You'll notice that is not a typo. I've had some questions about that in the past. We have now, in writing from ESDC, received approval to expand the scope of our program. And this is true, I believe, of all SWIP partners, but I, of course, can only speak for our own. But we can look at science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics programs, as well as business. The only program that we cannot fund inside of this program is the apprenticeship programs or the anything sort of leading to the trades. That was very explicit from ESDC, which is unfortunate for us because about 40% of our industry is in fact the trades. So full or part-time studies and full or part-time employment. This was actually a bit of a change from the previous agreement. Previously, our students had to be full-time enrolled and full-time enrolled as students and full-time employed as part of their work integrated learning opportunity. That is no longer the case. Students that are part-time enrolled or are enrolled part-time, are participating in a part-time employment opportunity would be eligible under the new criteria for the program. This was actually a request that the SWIP partners had made in listening to some of yourselves, but also amongst each other as we've been evaluating applications that came in, and with the employers that we work with, that in order to accommodate the needs of certain demographic groups, such as students with disabilities, there are instances where they may not be able to complete a full-time program, for example, or do full-time work. But that shouldn't preclude them from participating in a program like this. So we are hoping, and this is very new, but we are hoping that by expanding the allowability criteria for students to come in, that it will allow more students from different demographic groups to enter the program. One of the areas we have not yet been able to make headway, of course, is the newcomer to Canada classification. We all know that there's a movement towards internationalization of education in Canada, and that a lot of those students are on variations of student visas. This program is still dedicated to Canadians, permanent residents or refugees with status from citizenship and, well, I forget their name now, but formerly Citizenship and Immigration Canada. Immigration, refugees, and Canadian citizenship, I think, is the new name. And then, of course, they have to be legally entitled to work in the jurisdiction where the work placement is taking place. So those are the key criteria, and of course, the placement itself should be electricity related. To give you some examples of some of the placements that we've put in, we've had computer programmers for a data company. I mentioned Tesla Motors. We've got software engineers that are working for smart grid startups. We've had business analysts in the electricity utilities that are working on mergers and acquisitions. We even had one health sciences student majoring in nursing, actually, go into a health and safety role at one of our companies. So there's a lot of different opportunities. So when you think of electricity, don't just think of engineering and technologies. Think of the broader corporate functions, the support functions that could also be filled. There are a lot of companies looking for those functions as well. So that makes up about 20% of our workforce if we're looking at it. So process. I know that there are always questions. Each of us have our own way of doing this. And we will be sharing this deck, by the way, at the end of the presentation too. And I actually have linked each of these forms of reference. So typically the way our program works is employers will apply first, then they have their students apply, the ones that they've selected. We develop a learning plan in partnership with them. I know some of you, particularly in the co-op programs, have already had students working on their learning plans. Sometimes what they'll do is they'll just copy and paste the answers they've done for you guys right into our online form. The learning plan is supposed to be developed in partnership with their lead supervisor in their organization that they're planning to work for. And in fact, we've created a double signature field so that both parties need to sign the learning plan when it's submitted. There is another online form, the direct deposit form, because we do all of our payments by direct deposit, electronic funds transfer. The contract is one of the few pieces in this whole thing that is not currently digital. We do send the contracts out by email once all of the approval steps above have been completed, and those are sent back countersigned to us, to the employers. Then on a monthly basis, we process claims. Based on a previous month's salaries that have been paid with pay stubs to prove it, employers will submit an online form with the pay stub information. We'll review that, verify it against the contract, ensure that it's either the 50 or the 70%, depending on whether it's a student from a regular group or an underrepresented group. And then we will pay whatever it is to the maximum allotment, whether it's $5,000 or $7,000, again, depending on whether or not it's a student from a regular group or one of the underrepresented groups that we mentioned above. We do a check-in midway through the placement, and depending on the length of the placement, we may do more than one. And then at the end of the placement, we do a reflection. So we ask that students complete the reflection as part of their placement. We ask that supervisors complete a reflection with regard to the placement. So how did it go with the student? Also, how did we administer the program so that we can learn any lessons that there may have been required? And then also at the end of it, we ask the employer that's been managing, typically in the HR function, the whole process from their end, is there anything that we could do to maybe improve the program, or any feedback that they could provide to us. So those are the steps of the program. Again, all of the forms that I've referenced here are online. We've tried to make this as easy as possible for employers. We know how busy people can be, so employers and for student participants. So we've tried to make this as easy as possible. by putting as much online as possible. And we are investigating an option for an online contract. We just have to, we're looking at some of the legalities around that to make sure that it would still pass muster with regard to the funder. So that's sort of the process. And again, we will be passing the deck out at the end. So I've got links to all of the forms in the notes section of the PowerPoint that we'll be sharing with you as well. The second sort of big objective of the program is we had actually included in our proposal I'm going to call it a professional development program. Originally, our thought was we might be developing something along the lines of, you know, a training program for renewables, whether it's solar, geothermal, perhaps wind, something along those lines, technical. What we overwhelmingly heard from our steering committee, which by the way is composed of members of the of academia as well as from industry, is that that's actually not needed. We're actually in Canada turning out very world-class students with highly prized technical skills. Where we seem to be needing a bit more work is on the professional skills side, and this is why co-op and work integrated learning is so important, because these skills are sort of baked into that work placement sort of function. In order to jumpstart it, however, the steering committee gave us direction to develop a professional skills training program. So what we did is we started out with environmental scan to understand, first of all, what are we talking about with regard to professional skills or soft skills or global competencies or any of the foundational skills. There's a variety of different names for them. But in the electricity sector, when we go out and talk to our employers and we talk to the educators that are training, whether it's the deans of technology or the deans of engineering, et cetera, what are we talking about with regard to soft skills or professional skills? And what we ultimately settled on were a top 10 list of professional skills. They don't align perfectly with some of the other things that people talk about, things like leadership, for example. We've actually determined that that's a composite skill, not a foundational or single skill that can be evaluated on its own. But we have found a top 10. So reading comprehension, critical thinking, time management, speaking, active listening, decision-making, self-awareness or monitoring, coordination or teamwork, social perceptiveness, and active listening were the top 10 that we ultimately settled on, based not just on the environmental scan, but on consultation with our steering committee and on a focus group that we put together, as well as survey research that we did. Some of you may have even participated in that. So based on that, we've come to this top 10 list, and we are now developing a program over the course of the next 3 months that we hope to pilot early in the new year. Pilot participants or pilot partners could be academic institutions, whether it's co-op departments or potentially deans in technology or in engineering, depending on whether it's college or university level. And we've also put together an academic advisory committee made up of members from a variety of different disciplines. So again, deans of technology, deans of engineering, some co-op and professional development office participation. And they represent almost now every province and territory in Canada. And the goal was, again, to provide academic rigor and oversight of the program that we developed to ensure that the learning outcomes we are attempting to achieve will in fact be achieved by implementing this. So in order to do that, of course, we have a curriculum developer on staff, as well as instructional designers, and we've just hired a firm to do some videography for us as well, as components of the program. We've got a 4-phase approach to this. So the first phase, of course, is awareness to ensure, what are professional skills and why are they necessary. Second phase would be like self-directed learning online, probably. Third phase would be instruction, instructor-led, or typically organized into groups. And the fourth phase is matched to a mentor or coach that could further develop those skills. And we are developing all of the material to support all of those functions. So professional skills training program, more to come on that, but I expect that we'll be making an announcement very early in the new year. And for any of your organizations that wish to participate or learn more about it, we are more than happy to talk about it. It's our goal to help make this as widely available as possible. This is a lovely picture of the San Francisco Bay Bridge. It has absolutely nothing to do with what we're talking about today, except one of the things that we've identified, and that you have identified, and that students have identified, and that employers have identified, is that we do not have currently at EHRC a method by which a student who does not currently have a placement can find an employer who currently has a placement without first contacting our office to do so. Right now, that is a very manual process, and admittedly, I think we've probably only placed like 1 or 2% of the students that come with us directly with employers that are looking. Mostly, it is employer-led. It is our goal to change that. So one of our components of this program is it's going to be the career portal development piece. So I know a number of us have heard and talked about the Magnet Career Connect option. We have decided, both at the steering committee level and also at our board of directors level and our management team level, that we are going to proceed with that. It's just a matter of time before we can implement it correctly. But that will be the tool that we use primarily for this connections piece, building a bridge across the different organizations. But also, we're looking at it as, because there is a light LMS included, or a light learning management system included, we may use this as a part of our content delivery for the professional skills program. But again, more to come on that, depending on the functionality of the system that's to be evaluated further. So that is the big news on that from our end. Again, I would expect to hear about this early in the new year as far as placements go. How can everyone get involved? So we have developed a fair bit of collateral for the program. One is a program overview. It's a really high level, what is the Empowering Future student work placement program, how to get involved, regardless of which audience you fall into, whether it's educator, student, or employer. We've got an employer one-pager that we can share with you to share with your employer base, those who may be interested. We've got a student one-pager with the what's and how-tos and all that sort of stuff. We've got an educator one-pager, again, same thing, mostly for yourselves, but if there are any sort of any of your colleagues that may wish to learn more about the program, that can be shared internally as well. We have an employer step-by-step guide. So one of the things we heard, for smaller employers, this isn't as big a deal because we've tried to build user experience into this process as much as we can. So for smaller employers, once we've engaged with typically somebody who's in the HR function, they seem to get it and they follow the process fairly consistently. Where things were falling down was in what I would say the mid to larger size employers, where you'd have a recruiter that was doing the intake, and then you'd have HR function doing the onboarding, handed off to the supervisor. And then for anything finance related, that was a totally different group of people. So what we did is we put together an employer step-by-step guide to be shared with whoever our primary or secondary contacts were at each of the employers we're working with, so that they know what to expect and how to expect it and how to work within the program, because typically their internal communication handoff was not always as smooth as we would have liked it. So by putting this together, it's something that we hope will be, actually has been helpful. We've already received feedback on this and been helpful from a number of our employer partners. We've also developed a professional skills infographic, something that, again, we're happy to share with all of you, showing which professional skills we will be developing and working on. And of course, there's always an opportunity to share. So feel free to, anything that we produce or anything that we make available to you, feel free to share with colleagues, share with employers that you're working with, share with students who may be interested potentially in joining the electricity sector, or even trying it out. One of the great things about work integrated learning is it's an opportunity to try out different sectors. We are planning to pilot the professional skills program, so if you are interested in participating in the pilot, please let me know. My email will be at the end of the slide deck, and I'm more than happy to share that with all of you as well. We are currently in production of a work integrated learning white paper. We actually had Minister Patty Hyde weigh in on this, which was kind of exciting, as well as a number of you. We've heard from some of you as well on this, as well as a number of our industry partners and a few of what I would call the rising stars. Those are our students in the electricity sector that have participated in the Empowering Futures program. So we're kind of excited about this. I expect, again, that we'll be releasing that very, very soon. We're also in the process of developing a professional skills white paper based on the research that we've conducted to date. I am literally reviewing that as we speak, so not currently, of course, because I'm talking to all of you, but right after we get off the call today, I'll be looking at that in a little bit more detail. Again, I expect that to be released very, very soon. EHRC is a membership organization, so we are more than happy to partner with you as members of EHRC. Some of the benefits of that, of course, are free access to any member who signs on for 3 years to our labor market intelligence study, which we just released. And of course, first view of anything that we do. So when a new SWIP program is announced, for example, our members are the first to find out about it. On the subject of LMI, so everything that we do is data driven. So we know that by 2022, 20% of the workforce will retire. There's 107,000 workers nationwide, so we're looking at a retirement of 20% of that, 20,000 people. We also know that our workforce skews older, and our workforce does not have the representation from youth that other sectors do. So while Canada's labour market more broadly is about 14% youth under the age of 25, the electricity sector is only 4%. So one of the reasons that our board was very clear that they wanted to participate in this program was because we need to do a better job of attracting youth to the sector. Most people, when they think of the electricity sector, they think of engineers, they think of power line technicians, the guys who climb the lines, arborists, technicians, technologists, those sorts of things. But there are a wealth of opportunities in the sector, whether it's corporate functions in HR, health and safety, business analysis, regulatory. We've had some cool jobs for political science students in the regulatory environment. In HR, I think there's potential for a philosophy student. I've heard of some of our larger, sort of more progressive-minded employers considering those opportunities as well. So there are a lot of opportunities for students to engage in the sector. And we do know that there are going to be a number of occupations under pressure in the next 5 years. In the next few years. So things to keep in mind. We've got another program running concurrently as well right now, the Green Jobs program. This one's not quite as much funding behind this one, but we do still have training opportunities available. The wage subsidy opportunities are now complete because it finishes March 31st. But for any youth, non-students who are currently 15 to 30 years old and underemployed, we can help fund employability skills training. So if it looks like they're a youth who is not currently registered in a school program, but could benefit from upskilling or employability skills training, we have funding for that to the tune of up to $15,000 or $20,000 if they are Indigenous, a youth with a disability, or come from a rural or remote community in Canada. We've currently placed 35 students, but we have funding for a few more, particularly on the training stream. This is a cool picture of a building being built, and what it references is actually our National Occupation Standards program. So we are flipping the way we have traditionally looked at national occupational standards in Canada on its head. Historically, what we've done is we've taken, for example, a bunch of engineers in the electrical engineering function, put them in a room and determined what are the skills, competencies, tasks required for you to do your job well as an electrical engineer. We flipped that on its head, and instead what we've developed is a competency framework, building it from the ground up for the entire sector. So the idea is to understand what are all of the competencies, skills, tasks required for the entire sector, and then look at what occupations emerge as a result, what stacks on top of each other to see what occupations emerge. So the benefit of this system is it's a standard terminology, something, by the way, which we're coordinating with the SDC as they look at their skills taxonomy, but a standard terminology across the entire electricity sector that applies to all jobs, so that we can do things like, oh, here's a newcomer to Canada. They've previously held the following occupation and developed the following skills or competencies. What might we need for that person to enter the occupation that most closely aligns with what they're doing here? Or here's somebody that is a wind turbine installer, but we need 50 installers for every 2 technicians. So how many additional skills, or what percentage of new skills they require in order to become a technician rather than an installer? And are their skills transferable to other occupations, perhaps solar photovoltaic installer or PV installer, for example. So this is going to give us an opportunity to do a lot of that transferable skills work more easily in an online database. So this is exciting for us because it's really going to change the nature of the way we've done occupational standards in the past. Some of the occupations we're looking at: electrical engineering technician and technologist, power systems operator, power station operator, geothermal heat pump installer, wind turbine technician. Some possible new ones that we're looking at are heat pump designer, small systems designer, solar, smart grid specialist, nuclear systems operator, non-licensed, energy storage technician. This was one that was very interesting, which would be a little bit more avant-garde. And another one was EV charging station installer or electric vehicle charging station installer. So this is an exciting project. What comes out of it ultimately could help all of you, or again, the deans of your different programs, drive curriculum change over the long term. So there are impacts there as we look at it. Also doing a big piece on the future of work. So looking at automation of the sector. Very interesting, very initial findings. We're not ready to publish just yet, but it looks like there's 2 points of view on with regard to automation in our sector. One is we have no idea what to do and we're not doing anything about it yet. The other is it's here, it's coming, and we think we have a plan to deal with it. So expect that to be published probably by the end of this calendar year. We were very fortunate. PricewaterhouseCoopers is co-sponsoring that with us. We're also doing a big piece on women in the workplace. We know that our sector's only got about 25% women making up the sector, and we're trying to improve that a number of different ways. But one of them is to understand why there aren't more women in leadership positions. So we've just closed the surveys on that, and analysis is starting. We do a fair bit of work on the diversity side, the diversity and inclusion side at EHRC. We're currently working on a project with the Alberta government on a diversity toolkit. So first of all, understanding, what constitutes diversity in the Alberta context, what's being done currently. We're actually reviewing real life employer examples of HR policies, procedures, and practices, and sharing feedback on what makes good diversity and inclusion practice. So that they can modify their own stuff. And we expect to have draft resources for Alberta employers available by November, or by the end of November, early December. Our leadership accord on gender diversity is something that we're very proud of at EHRC. Again, we know that women only make up 25% of our sector, and that's particularly bad for the trades. So we are trying to do something about it, something that's actionable. We're working in partnership with the Equal by 30 campaign, some of you may have heard of. We actually developed the Leadership Accord on Gender Diversity first. But the idea behind it is CEOs sign on and then they commit to benchmarks for change. It might be that you have one woman board of directors member. We want to see that changed within 2 years' time. It might be that you've only got so many women in leadership positions. We want to see that change within 2 years' time for the better. It might be that you want to move the dial on the number of women apprentices that you take on. Again, you're committing to 2 years' time change. So there are a variety of different ways that people can commit to change. And we do have a number of unions, educational institutions, and of course, employers that have signed on to this. And it's something that we're very proud of at EHRC because it is making change in the sector. It's something that people have talked about for a long time in our sector, but there has not been a lot of movement on the numbers. Upcoming in Toronto, our Agents of Change event. It's Rise by Lifting Others. The goal is really to have men in the room talking about how they can help women advance in their careers. Sometimes what we find in the gender discussion is that we have a lot of women talking about how women can improve themselves, but we'd like to see more male champions of women in the workplace. So this is something coming up in Toronto with the details on the screen there. And then, of course, our Awards of Excellence, which, of course, again, educational institutions can participate in, and certainly we encourage you to do so. More information on our website about that as well. But our Awards of Excellence, the nominations are due, I believe, at the end of, I think it's mid-November, and the actual event is in February. So that is a lot of what's going on at EHRC right now, and that gives you a good sense of some of the things going on with regard to our different programs that all of which sort of feed into each other a little bit one way or another. So I am going to open up the questions here. We'll start with, so the first, would students in a renewable energies technician program be eligible? Probably would be my answer to that. If they are not in fact considered a trade, then yes, they would be eligible for the program. Typically, we're looking at everything in the renewable sector as eligible for the program. Again, with the exception of a formalized trade structure program. The next one, Do you mean students looking for full or part-time employment? Absolutely. So our program, regardless of whether they are full or part-time, students are eligible, again, so on both sides. If they are enrolled part-time or full-time studies at an educational institution, they would absolutely be considered eligible for the program. If they are hired on a full or part-time contract, whether it's co-op or other work integrated learning opportunity, that too would be considered eligible for the program. The other question, are Indigenous organizations eligible, such as bands who have their own power projects? Again, absolutely. We have no limitations with one exception. We cannot fund, the best way to consider this with regard to the organizations that are eligible, we can't fund a previously federally funded position. So the way to think of this is if you've got 50% of the money coming from us for the position and 50% of the money coming from another federally funded fund, that would not be eligible. If, however, the position is 50% coming from the Student Work Placement Program through EHRC, and the other balance of funds comes through some other form of revenue, whether it's electricity rates or consulting services or whatever it happens to be, that would be considered eligible. So hopefully that that helps to clear that up a little bit. We no longer have a minimum number of weeks that students have to work. It's our goal to work with our education partners, our employers, and the students to determine what is best and based on best practice in work integrated learning. So there is not a limit on those. Would first-year students be likely to find a summer position through this program? Certainly, I've certainly seen a number of them. First-year students do fall within the underrepresented groups category for us as well. So we would absolutely consider those opportunities for them as well. So we are, I think that's the total of the questions that have been provided through the Q&A, but I did note that there may be some on the chat function as well. So I'm just going to bring that up now. Pardon me for just one moment. Let's have a look here. One of the questions that came in through the chat, so is the program open to SMEs? We are not currently restricted in our program. We are encouraging, so the way to think of this, no, there's no eligibility criteria with regard to size. We are encouraging more small and mid-sized companies to apply, and the reason for that is they tend to have less capacity for this type of program, and they're less able to bear more risk. So we're of course promoting more actively to that particular group. That's not to say that we're not accepting positions from larger firms, particularly if those larger firms are creating net new positions. So this you've probably heard from a number of the other partners if you haven't already. Position is only considered net new if that particular role has never previously been filled within the company. It has essentially been created brand new. So that was one of the that's one of the criteria to consider, and that does come up a little bit from a number of the different employers that we've worked with. Does anybody else have any questions that about the program or about any of the work that EHRC is doing? Feel free to add them to the Q&A section in your dialog box there. How long does approval take? Well, so normally we try to have a five business day turnaround, and we do that very intentionally. That said, I had to go through a very significant staffing change. One of our primary project coordinators on the project found love in Germany and left us right in the middle of the summer. So we've since replaced that role, of course, but there was a backlog that was created as a result. So we're just a little outside of our 5-day turnaround right now, but I expect that by the end of this week or next, we'll be back to 5 business days to turn around an application. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be approved in 5 days. It does depend on if they've given us all the information that we require. By doing online forms, one of the benefits of that is it kind of forces people to give us the information we need to make a valid assessment. And I would say a solid 95 to 98% of the applications we receive are actually approved. And that's just as a result of people identifying themselves or self-selecting out afterwards. I do have a couple of stories where I'm very sad. We had 2 cases where women power line technicians, a trade that is very underrepresented with regard to women in the sector, had to be denied only because they fall within the trades, which made me very sad. But that was unfortunately the case just because of trades. Are funds provided on a first come, first served basis? The answer to this is yes. That said, I have currently, this is a good question actually for a couple of reasons, because I didn't mention it earlier. Very early on in the program, and this is one of the reasons we built a steering committee for this kind of thing, is we discovered from working working with yourselves, also working with our steering committee made up of advisors from academia and from industry, that industry didn't want to apply for the program and try and find a student if they weren't at first sure that they could secure the funds in order to hire that student, particularly for small and mid-sized companies. And educational institutions, as a result of their own policies, can't post a job unless the job is guaranteed at the end of the day. Which made a bit of a sort of a circle scenario where we wouldn't let them apply for the program without having a student in advance. So we changed that. We've now created a situation where employers can apply to the program without first identifying a student, and we will tentatively approve that application pending eligibility of a student that they find. And this has worked really well for attracting small and mid-sized firms to the program. By the way, that 30 days is renewable, so if they don't find somebody in 30 days, we don't hold them, but we do. It just makes us check in with them to see how the recruitment is going for the role. So they can apply without a student. They can ensure that the role is guaranteed or that the funding is guaranteed. And we very, very specifically did that as a direct result of feedback, again, from our steering committee and from all of yourselves. So that was one of the definite program improvements as a result of feedback. And yes, first come, first served, and we currently have 200 open positions available in our revised in the program to date. So again, we've already placed, I believe it's 235 this fiscal year, so starting April 1st, and our goal is to place 200 more by the end of this fiscal year, which ends March 31st. If the position is the next question, if the position is net new, but the employer is hiring less co-op students, is that an issue? That's an interesting question. So the way that and this is one that I actually had to go back to the funder on, because, so a good example of this would be in Alberta. They actually had, there have been workforce reductions out in Alberta. I'm sure some of you are aware of this, or all of you, in fact. And as a result, co-op placements were one of the first on the chopping block, unfortunately. That said, there were companies that we worked with that said, you know what, we wouldn't create this opportunity unless we had the funding in order to back it up. Unfortunately, that did not qualify as net new, according to the funder. And so we weren't able to accept that particular co-op role. Now, those particular co-op roles. Because those companies had previously participated in the program with a certain number of students, and so we couldn't actually fund those ones after the fact. So if the position is net new, but the employer is hiring less co-op students overall, I would have to evaluate that with the employer, because I suspect the answer is no, but that may be one I would have to go to the funder to further clarify. Just because they asked for a total number of essentially co-op placements in the given organizations that we're working with. And if that number is not in fact, or pardon me, not co-op, but work integrated learning placements, because we are looking more broadly than co-op. If that number is lower year 2 than it is year 1, then we would have to have a very serious look at that to see if in fact it could be funded. The next question, would a 100-hour placement qualify? Example, a business course with a requirement for a 100-hour placement. Hours, so 100 hours, that would be like 2.5 weeks probably. That's certainly on the lower end. We would probably have to evaluate that on a case-by-case basis. Again, I may have to go to the funder, but they may come back to us and just say we have the ability to approve it or not. If that's the case, then I would say yes, that probably qualifies for work integrated learning. Again, as long as there are learning objectives assigned at the front end, and there is a reflection on what learning occurred as a result of placement. That would qualify as work integrated learning. Another question came in. So to clarify, do employers need to have hired a student before applying? No, they do not have to. Certainly a number of our employers have done that, but that doesn't mean that they have to come to us. Again, if they've identified that they have a position opening and they just want to guarantee the funds are there for them to participate in the program, then we will essentially hold a position for them while they find somebody to fill it. And I think there's a field. This has happened numerous times, by the way. So there's a field that it asks for the student name, and what employers put there is just hold. And that's literally the only field that is affected by this whole thing. So they just put in hold, and we hold a position for them. And then in 30 days after application, we check in with them to see how the recruitment is going if we haven't heard from them since then. Next question, are there deadlines for employers to apply? For example, can employers apply for the current fall term, September to December? That's a little tough, largely because we're supposed to have the contracts in place as of September 1st. And so that's a little tough to do, to place the current fall term. Can employers receive more than one grant as long as the position is net new? Oh, I think the question, sorry, I'm just thinking about this. So I think what you mean here is that, I think I know how I'm going to answer this. So if what you mean is that the total number of positions a given employer can have, we did set a limit of 10 total co-op funded positions. The only reason we did that is we do have some really large firms in the utility sector in Canada, and we wanted to give equal opportunity for a variety of firms to apply. So the total number of applications a given employer can submit is 10. So I think that answers the question, and if not, Tara, I apologize. So please feel free to clarify if you feel that doesn't answer the question. Another question that came in: are there different funding considerations for graduate versus undergraduate students? Great thing about the program is doesn't matter how the student is enrolled. If it's a graduate program or an undergraduate program, they're still considered eligible. So that doesn't change the funding parameters. And just to clarify for everyone, the funding parameters are 50% to a maximum of $5,000 per placement, and 70% to a maximum of $7,000 per placement for those students that fall into one of the underrepresented groups. The underrepresented groups, of course, being first-year students, women in STEM, STEM, not STEAM. There is still a differentiation there. Newcomers to Canada, Indigenous students, and students with disabilities. Those are the different groups that fall under underrepresented groups. Are reporters, the next question, sorry, are reporters providing stats for one calendar year, i.e. number hired in 2018, or for one term? Example, number of students hired winter 2019. I'm not sure I understand the question here. Bob, do you understand that one? Maybe the attendee who posted it could further clarify that particular question. How do educational institutions typically engage with the EHRC? Does this ability to have students matched with employers through your council? We're not a council anymore, by the way, we're a sector association. Compete with in-house co-op and internship programs. We absolutely do not compete with in-house co-op and internship programs. It is our goal to work in partnership with any of the educational institutions that wish to participate in our program. So we're more than happy to discuss the different ways of doing that. So please feel free to be in touch with that. Again, my contact information is at the end. Other ways to engage with us, if you're interested in participating in the pilot study or the pilot professional skills program, feel free again to be in touch with us. If you're interested in being a member, in access more of the stuff that we do on a more frequent and more regular basis, again, feel free to be in touch with me. And of course, if you want any of the promotional materials I mentioned before, again, feel free to be in touch with me. Those are all free resources. We are more than happy to share those with you so that you can share with your own networks, whether it's colleagues or with partners. Would students on a first work term qualify under the underrepresented group? Yes. I think that answers that question. What else here? Can we get the list of the top 10 skills you mentioned? Absolutely. So one of the things that I mentioned was the infographic. In fact, I think at the end of this, Haley and Bob, what I'll do is I will just give you a list of the PDF documents that we put together. So the infographic of the skills. We've also got an impact graphic from last year. I know it's dated now, but at least it'll show you what we accomplished last year on the same PDF. So we can share that with you. I'll also share with you the different materials. So the project overview, the employer one-pager, the educational one-pager, and the student one-pager. Again, you are free to share those amongst your networks. I would mention that for those universities and colleges that have posted information about our program on their websites, they have had more uptake with the EHRC funding than those that haven't. So that might be of interest to you. And again, we are more than happy to offer language around this. We've done this for a number of different institutions across Canada as well. So please think of us as a partner. We want to continue working with you. We've tried to be at every CEWIL event to make sure that we're out here and that we're available and open. We want to keep the lines of communication open. So again, feel free to reach out with any questions whatsoever. I believe we've actually gotten through all of the questions here, and we've got 5 minutes left. So thank you so much, all of you, for being on the call today. Again, if you have anything that you'd like to discuss further, please feel free to send me an email or give me a call. I'm more than happy to be available for that. Otherwise, I hope you all have a wonderful October day, and looking forward to connecting in the future as we continue to roll out this fantastic program for more and more students across Canada.
Yeah, and on behalf of CEWIL and myself, we'd really like to thank you, Mark, for the in-depth knowledge about the Empowering Futures program, along with all the other programs and work that you're doing at EHRC. It's been a very informative session for us all, so thank you very much, and for answering all the questions. I believe the one question, I'm just going to go out there, and I think maybe the person was asking, maybe not reporters, but are employers reporting on a yearly basis regarding the number of students that they've hired?
Yes. So as part of the application approach, or the application package itself, employers do have to report each time how many students they've hired in a given calendar year.
Excellent. All right. Well, perfect timing. 3 minutes to spare. I just see, I'll check one last check if there's any new questions. I think what we'll do is for any further questions that come in, we will reconvene and make sure we get all the answers out to everybody who was in attendance. Thank you all very much. Have a great day, and please feel free to contact me or Mark in regards to any follow-up that you need.
And just before we sign off, Bob, there was something that came in on the chat. Everything that we do is available bilingually. So I'll make sure that we share everything in both French and in English so that everyone has that as well.
All right. Thank you all.
Okay, thank you all. I hope you have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Haley, for convening everything technically.
Yes, thanks, Haley.
No problem at all. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.